Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Um, in the previous class, I think we already covered the definitions of unemployed, and we did a little math to kind of discover the way how we calculate unemployment rates and also different indicators using the definitions of unemployed, employed, labor force, legal wage populations. Today, what we're going to do is trying to look a little bit more in depth to the unemployment topics in our economy. In order to talk about employment or unemployment, we have to actually um, understand how the structures of unemployment it's being defined. Well, in economics, there are three types of unemployment that we can find in our study. So number one, we call this fractional unemployment. So this type of unemployment basically is describing where people they are trying to look for a job, but they haven't find the perfect positions that fit the job skills, and they are basically floating around and looking for jobs. And as you can imagine, when you get out of school, it's not going to be always the case. You will land on a job positions that you want to perform your job skills. So sometimes people take random times. Some people might actually take 2 months. Some people might take half a year. So this types of unemployment basically it's a short-term unemployment. However, there is one that's going to be a longer term, which is what we call the structural unemployment. So the structural unemployment basically is caused by the mismatch of job skills or the supply and demand in the job market. So we basically can imagine, given any job market, let's say job market in San Francisco, sometimes the required skills to work in this particular market might be different from time to time. So for instance, when we have more tech industry comes in and they are driving up very high profits and revenues and causing a lot of the local firm they actually quit because it's so expensive to run the operations in San Francisco. It might actually drive a lot of these positions that we usually offer in San Francisco to somewhere else. However, the people who live here with that job skills might not be able to find the other company that hire for the same job skills. So in this case, well, this mismatch of the job skills between workers and jobs will create additional unemployment in the market too. Well, lastly, we have this one, which is the main concern in our study. It's what we call the cyclical unemployment. So the cyclical unemployment basically caused by any downturns or recessions in the economy. So those are the unemployment that it's not created by the mismatch of the markets. It's not created by the will of people to look for the best positions, but it's just mainly caused by the business cycle. So when the economy actually doing well, most of the time the unemployment rate will usually be low. But when we actually jump into a recession, usually unemployment rate will jump. And that's basically the types of unemployment we are describing here. So generally speaking, the short-term unemployment and long-term unemployment that we described earlier, the fractional unemployment and structural unemployment are the one that we are going to study in this chapter. We will leave the cyclical unemployment to discuss in the later time when we jump into our macro model. But let's focus on this fractional unemployment. In this fractional unemployment, to be honest, it's just a natural process for employees to find the employers in the job market. if you think about this, there is almost no way to avoid this kind of unemployment to happen. It's just naturally for the employees to look for the best employer that fits their own job skills, and also as well as it's equally difficult for the firm to determine which candidate is the best for the jobs. So it just naturally happened. So in general, we don't think the fractional unemployment is anything bad to our economy. It's just the kind of like a cost for us to find the best match of the employees and the employers. So in fact, we believe that some of this fractional unemployment will actually increase economic efficiency because workers now can find a satisfying job, and that will increase the productivity at their positions. And at the same time, the firm might actually find a better candidate to fill in the positions so that they can be as productive as they are in the job positions. On the other hand, the structural unemployment is slightly different. So the structural unemployment usually caused by the mismatch of in the job market. So for example, maybe there are some highly skilled hand drawing animation artists. They might not actually have the perfect fits to the modern job markets. Let's say, well, there are some group of artists that they used to work for Walt Disney Pictures, and they're basically the one who are drawing the Mickey Mouse and all these other animations or characters. But with the change of the technology, most of this hand drawing animations has switched to digital form. So in order for Walt Disney to actually produce those animations, well, they don't actually require the same job skill as before. They might actually switch to maybe hiring those digital artists to create 3D animations. So those who work at Walt Disney with the skills to draw those characters on the paper, it's no longer in demand, and that's why those people might actually fall out of the employer category. However, it's not necessary to be true that those workers will be ultimately out of the labor markets or the labor force because obviously this group of workers who don't fit to the modern day job criteria, they might be able to improve themselves. Right? They can actually go back to school. They can actually learn new skills. They can actually try to learn how to use computer to draw those characters again in 2D or 3D forms. So it just takes time for people to adapt to these new job skills required by the labor market. But obviously, comparing to the fractional unemployment, the structural unemployment is going to take longer time for people to adapt. There are quite a few industry in the past. We have seen a big shift of the job skills. For example, like the newspaper industry, farmers in the emerging markets, or maybe other kind of like communication service, like the pager service in the 1990s. Cynical unemployment. Cynical unemployment is the type that we actually concern the most in the study of macroeconomics. Well, the reason is because during the recession periods, or maybe in the history, the Great Depression periods, we could actually see that how people losing their job might actually causing a big social events where forcing people to lose their income to pay for their expenses, maybe moving out of their home. So some of the recessions that we have seen, right, like in 2007, 2009, during the Great Recessions, as you know, Ford actually laid off a lot of people during that period. And that's basically the types of unemployment we call the cynical unemployment. So during the recessions, the cynical unemployment will logically increase. However, when the economy is expanding, the cynical unemployment usually will decrease, or maybe when we get to a certain point, it will go to zero. And this bar chart might actually give you a very good idea about what is the magnitude could be for those cyclical unemployment. Well, as you can see in the chart, we are basically given different years of events. 1993, which is stock market prices in the United States. During that period, you can actually see that, well, the IBM company actually lay off 60,000 of the workers in basically just a couple of months. So this is a very dramatic move in the past. During the Great Recessions, 2008, November, Citigroup actually laid off 50,000 of the workers worldwide. Again, it's a very, very steep layoff. As you can see, what the magnitudes of this cyclical unemployment can be very, very big. We are only talking about just one company out of many here in a particular period. And those numbers could add up. So in the later chapter, we are going to discover if we are facing a cyclical unemployment, should we actually do the same thing again as we did during the Great Depressions, doing nothing? Or should we actually take action to reduce this very harmful cyclical unemployment in our economy? And also, there's a very confusing terms. Hopefully, you actually read it on the newspaper somewhere before. The government, especially in the United States, it's very common for them to actually put out the term full employment when they are making a public speaking. Well, the term full employment is actually a confusing one. The reason is because full employment does not mean zero unemployment. Technically, what we mean by full employment, we basically assume there are some level of unemployment exists in the economy that naturally exists in the economy. And the full employment term actually refers to when the economy is not being affected by the cyclical business cycles change. So to make it a little bit more precise in our definitions here, we basically say, well, there is some natural rate of unemployment that exists in the economy. And we know those natural rate of unemployment include the fractional unemployment and the structural unemployment. So those are the two categories we cannot avoid. Those are the changes or improvements of the economy, causing the mismatch of the skill or maybe taking longer time for people to get on the right jobs. However, if we are looking at the actual rate of unemployment, we know the actual rate of unemployment is not only just the fractional unemployment and structural unemployment, but also adding on top of the cyclical unemployment too. So when we actually refer to the term full employment, well, we're basically saying that, well, when cyclical unemployment is equal to zero, or when the actual rate of unemployment equals to the natural rate of unemployment, and that's where the full employment is achieved. So in another word, full employment basically means when cyclical unemployment is equal to zero, or our job market is not being affected by the business cycle fluctuations. Now the question is, how do we know about what's the level of natural rate of unemployment in our economy? Well, the reason is because, well, if cyclical unemployment is going to happen during the business cycle, well, then how come in some country they have a natural rate of unemployment that it's 7% naturally happen, and there are some natural rate of unemployment that only equals to 2%, which again naturally happens. So what determines the natural rate of unemployment of a country? Well, in order to discover this topic, we have to start building a model. And this model is very similar to what you've seen in the supply-demand model that we covered in the class earlier. So the model we are going to study today is called the labor market model. And as you can see, well, the graph, the visuals of the model is pretty similar to the supply-demand model. But of course, there are some details to it. Well, in this model, we also have the supply side and the demand side for the labor's markets. However, the role of the two actually switch in positions. The supply side of the labor markets are the households and individuals. They are the one who supply the work for the firm to actually get hired. And on the demand side, it's where the firm and businesses, they will demand the labor from the job markets so that they can get the human capitals to produce. Well, on the demand side, to be honest, well, there is not much that we have to ask because, well, firms has only one objective to achieve. Well, the objective is always to maximize the profits. So in order to maximize the profits, obviously, they will care about the cost to pay for the labor, which is the wages that they have to pay. Well, the whole idea is when the wages in the market actually drops and when the cost of production decrease, this is when the firm would like to actually hire more people so that they can get the very low cost to produce the same thing to sell at the same price, so they would be able to get a higher level of profits. So that's why on the demand side, when wages go down, the quantity demand for labor will actually go up. However, in reverse, when the wages go up, it's less profitable for the firm to hire, and in this case, the quantity demand for labor will decrease. Well, some of the factors that shifting the demand for labor, well, number one, change in other production costs. Just like in the previous study of supply demand, the cost of production is not only just on the human capitals. So firms sometimes will have to pay for other stuff like equipment or capitals for productions. In this case, if the cost for other production factor actually change, it will also change the way how firm determines how many workers they would like to hire. Also, the demand for price and outputs. When the firm actually facing a higher demand, they can charge a higher price in the market for selling the goods. They would like to hire more people to produce it to get more profits. The change in expected price and costs. So the expected prices for the product and expected costs for production factors will also make an impact to the decisions of the firm. And change in technology. So all these factors are the ones that actually shifting the demand curve for labor. And I strongly suggest you guys to get a reading from textbooks to look into some of these factors. Well, on the supply sides, we know the households, it's also easy to figure it out. Households will always think about, well, how much time they would like to work and how much income they will actually get from the time they spend at work. And the rest of the time, they would treat it like a leisure time or free time. So the general idea is households always trying to make themselves happy to maximize their utility. So in order to maximize their utility, they will have to always find a trade-off between income and non-working time or leisure time. Well, whenever the income goes up, the cost for leisure will be higher because, well, it's treating like an opportunity cost for leisure. However, when the wages go down, well, that means, well, the worker will have more chances to get the leisure at a lower cost by giving up not to work. So whenever the wages is higher to offer in the job markets, it's very likely the quantity supply of the labor will increase. People would like to work more because they don't want to give up the opportunity to earn income. However, when the wages actually go down, and make it easier for people to actually say, I don't want to work and I want to get free time. So the quantity supply of labor will drop. Well, some of these factors, again, can shift the supply of the labor markets. So for instance, any change in tastes and preferences of the households, they can actually switch the leisure and income preferences to determine, well, how much time they would like to work or whether they want to work or not in the economy. Expectations of wages, non-wage incomes, and total number of workers exist in the job market. Well, those are the, again, factors that shift the supply of labor in the job markets. Again, well, I would strongly recommend you guys to actually read those topics in the textbook. Now, we want to actually understand what explains the natural rate of unemployment. And we would like to begin with this four fundamental examples. Well, generally speaking, there are a lot of things that can actually contribute to the natural rate of unemployment. But most of the economists, they actually suggest that, well, the determinants of natural rate of unemployment are basically the policy, the demographics of the job markets, and also as well as the developments of the unions in the job markets. So we'll look into these four examples to understand, well, how sometime we can have a higher natural rate of unemployment in a country comparing to other periods or maybe comparing to other countries. So the first one we're going to go over is the unemployment insurance program. So in the United States, we actually have this unemployment insurance programs that providing a safety net for people who might actually facing a difficult time when they get laid off by their company. Well, if you think about uh, the mechanisms of the unemployment insurance, is when someone loses their jobs in the job market, the government will immediately actually giving the worker an initiations to apply for unemployment insurance payment. And this is the financial incentive for people to actually basically apply. But the problem is when people actually getting this safety net or insurance coverage, when they are not working in the economy, it's more or less likely that people might actually tend to choose taking a longer time to find the next jobs, or maybe they are not in a hurry to find the next jobs. So again, what we defined earlier, the fractional unemployment. Fractional unemployment basically defined the time that the employees and employers spend to search each other in the job markets to find the perfect match. When the unemployment insurance is very generous, when it's become too generous for people to say, hey, you know what, I want to take a few weeks off from work and trying to get just the unemployment insurance and not to worry about my life, it's probably going to motivate more people to take longer time to apply for the next job. So that's why in most of the Western European countries, or maybe the Northern American country like Canada and United States, with those very generous unemployment insurance program, the natural rate of unemployment usually will stand higher comparing to a developing country like Philippines or maybe China. Well, another determinants for natural rate of unemployment is basically the minimum wage, and this has been brought up in many different topics in economics. So, if you have studied the micro principles class, you probably already know the minimum wage law. It's basically serving like a price floor in the labor markets. So a price floor basically prevents the price of labor actually go below certain price. So in this case, maybe if we set a price floor in the labor markets at $15 an hour, that means, well, the firms cannot offer you anything lower than $15. And also it's not legal for the employees or the workers to actually offer the employers to pay them below $15 because it's illegal to take the actions. Well, by looking at the graph here, hopefully it will remind you about how we reach the supply and demand curve. In this graph, we are basically demonstrating if we are setting a price floor that it's way too high in the labor markets, let's say way above the equilibrium wage that offer in the markets. In this case, well, if we look at the graph, we know at this high wages or minimum wage, it will create a gap between the labor supply and the labor demand, or the quantity supply of labor and the quantity demand for laborers. And this gap, usually it's what we call the market surplus. But in this particular case, this market surplus also have a very interesting name that we already learned in this chapter. which is what we call the structural unemployment. So the higher the price floor we set above the minimum, above the equilibrium wage in the job markets, the more likely we're going to see this surplus to happen. And that will actually increase the structural unemployment in the job markets. Well, another examples that can actually affect the natural rate of unemployment is by the unions. So labor unions play a very important role too. So if you think about the previous example, when the minimum wage serving as a higher average wages that people receive in the job markets, well, usually the functions of a union is to offer workers better benefits or maybe offer them a negotiation power so that they can actually get a little bit higher pay or wages comparing to the average workers out there with no unions. So again, well, whichever way you want to think about this, in terms of benefits or pay, either way, most of the people would like to actually join the unions jobs instead of the non-union job because they know they will get better benefits to it. Now the problem is if we actually have the union offering particularly higher wages in the job markets, and a lot of people apply, but they couldn't get those positions because the firm does not offer them that many positions because it's so expensive to offer those unionized positions in the job market. And that will also increase the structural unemployment in our model. But fortunately, in the United States, we have this union movements actually died down in the year of 1990s and moving on to 2000s. Right now, we only have 9% of the workers outside the government sectors are unionized in the United States. So it's not causing us big problems. But again, well, just keep in mind, I'm not saying that the labor union is not necessary. Labor unions still provide that negotiation power for an individual workers to a big corporates like Facebook or Google's. Because when you're actually trying to fight for your benefits on your own, it's much more difficult comparing to if you're having a group of workers that support you within the same company. The last one that we're going to talk about here is what we call the efficiency wages. So efficiency wages in general basically is a wage that the company or corporations, they would intentionally offer above the average wages in the job markets. The reason for this efficiency wages is to attract the most productive worker in the job markets and trying to encourage them to perform their best at the positions. Which make perfect sense because, well, if we take a look of the big tech company in the Bay Area right now, most of the workers working in those companies, they are getting much higher average pay than the regular average workers in the United States. And obviously, well, the reason is because, well, this big tech companies, they are trying to attract people from around the world that can be best suited to their positions at the jobs. Again, well, since the average wages is much higher offered by this company, right, the efficiency wages is way too high than the market equilibrium wage, it will also, again, create that surplus in the labor market, which is what we call the structural unemployment. Well, combining the all of this different types of unemployment and or different factors that affects the natural rate of unemployment, we can conclude that in general, the natural rate of unemployment will be affected by maybe number one, the changes in the labor force characteristics. Right? So such as when the demographics of the labor force change, it will create this structural unemployment in the economy. And number two, the change in labor market institutions. So depends on what other companies getting higher. Right? So we might actually have a company getting higher with technology that they might be able to reduce the fractional unemployment. Maybe there are some traditional institutions, they might actually use the old-fashioned ones that take a longer time for them to find the right candidate. So this will contribute to the fractional unemployment. And number 3 right here, obviously, any changes in government policy, like the minimum wage law or the unemployment insurance payment programs, those are the policy that will definitely affect the natural rate of unemployment in a country. So generally speaking, we have covered all the topics in unemployment, and those are the things that actually are important to you when you finally land in a job market and trying to look for jobs. So again, I totally recommend you guys to take a look at the textbook and try to get the reading done in this chapter so that we can have a better understanding about the overall structures of this subject here. Alright, so I will see you guys in the next videos when we talk about inflation.